This is an Xpoint overview. What we'll cover: what is Xpoint? The physical installation, the completion of a full startup, and further details such as hardware, mapping, an example, and frequently asked questions. When do we use Xpoint? Xpoint's recommended for reconfigurable spaces and for retrofitting solutions. Xpoint modules offer great flexibility. Why? Because they're configurable and they meet our clients' changing needs. Our 30 amp relay that we're also familiar with goes in the Xpoint module. The module itself can then be mounted on fixtures to control entire rows. There are 3 levels of control: a single relay, a dual pole relay, and dimming. Who uses Xpoint? Best Buy, USPS, Costco, and others, mainly large projects. What is Xpoint? An Xpoint router, as seen in the picture here, consists of 2 types of control cards: the Xpoint router board and the Xpoint driver boards. So the router is larger and the driver boards are expansion boards. Here's 1, 2, and 3. You cannot mix the Xpoint bus with the 2400 bus. Here we can see that they're separated. This is the top portion of it. This is the 2400 bus, and the bottom portion is the Xpoint bus. The variations of Xpoint enclosures. At the top we have the smallest enclosure, the middle we have a larger enclosure, and the bottom we have the largest enclosure. All these will house the router and drivers. Relay installation. You can see that they can be mounted on fixtures. We can see here 3 mounting locations and the Cat 5. So low voltage, low voltage, low voltage, and the high voltage inside. Low voltage, high voltage. Okay, so all these Xpoint modules, all these Xpoint relays get distributed throughout the whole facility. Here we can see a router. Here's router A, and we could see that there are 2 Xpoint runs. Here's one, and here's the second. We can also see that they're terminated at the ends. So this is one router. The top portion gets integrated into a building, which can be the bottom portion. Of course, you guys are familiar with the 2400 bus, and we know that we can't mix it with the Xpoint bus. This is the Xpoint bus. Same picture as above. We have a router and possible driver boards. We have 2 Xpoint bus runs. Once again, we can't mix the 2400 and the Xpoint bus together. If you mix them, you might damage the system. And we also must be pretty careful because at the router we have 4 available ports. There will be 4 Cat 5s ran to the router, so we have to be sure they are connected to the right ports. So let's begin with an Xpoint startup. Start by completing the FAC on the 2400 bus and the Xpoint buses. The FACs, or the final activation checklist, should pass and the measured results should be within our recommended values. You also want to terminate the buses properly. Here we're going to be focusing on the Xpoint bus. We notice that at the top we're going to do the final activation checklist for the 2400 bus. And if there's one run, we're going to do one final activation checklist. If there's a second run, then we do another FAC for that bus as well. Please note that there are numerous termination points on the router, so this can get tricky. There's one here, here, and here. Here are the terminators, the traditional terminators that we use. With this picture, we also notice that we can terminate the bus with an RJ45 Xpoint terminator. Here, in further detail, we see that the bus, there's two buses coming from the router, and we'll be using our Xpoint J45 terminator to plug in to the ends of the Xpoint runs. Of course, the terminator's job is to tell the system that that's the end of the run, and will also avoid reflection. So once those values have been attained and it's terminated, power up the system. Check to make sure that the 2400 bus is stable and that all the devices are online. And now that the Xpoint hardware has been set up, we can focus on the mapping. So here's our system. So on top we can see the 2400 system, and below we can see the Xpoint system. And mapping overview. Here we're going to be talking about Xpoint 160 folder, the list, the actual Xpoint software, and the commands and their uses, inputs and outputs, and a cheat sheet for mapping. So here's the Xpoint folder. We use Xpoint 160 because it's most reliable. The folder pretty much has everything you're going to need, as seen in this picture here. It'll be DOS based, and there's command lists. Here's an example. Here's the command list. Here is the command list. As you can see, it consists of just 2 lines. Those 2 lines are going to be executed by the program. Here we see the folder. The list has the commands. And here, xpm160.exe, that'll actually execute it. Once you double click that, it'll bring up this prompt at the bottom to execute the actual list. And the line format. For example, the first line, we see dial DTC COM3 57600 dial and then a phone number. This first line tells the system to dial in and connect. Then it executes the second line. So here in more detail, the command dial DTC. In this case, COM3. To find out your COM port, you can just go to control panels, Windows control panels, and you look it up, whatever your modem may be. The speed of the modem, then another command, dial 91 to get out of the phone system, and the phone number itself. There are no spaces, as you can see in the example above. The line format continued. The second line, we're using the Xpro version. This, what it does is it reads the version of the Xpoint router. So the command, read the version, the address being targeted. So it'll output it. This will tell us if the Xpoint portion of the router is working. And for the full command list, just go to list.txt and you'll be able to see the rest of them. After you have line 1 and 2, you save it, then you run xpm.160.exe, and it'll execute those 2 lines, and it outputs the results. Second line, a different command. So save assignment, xp address 1, and in the file. What this does is it downloads the current mapping tables of the router. So here's save assignment. That's the command, and xp address 1, that's the address of the router being targeted. This will read table currently mapped at the router, and save it on our folder as calstatela.csv. It'll be a file. You always want to pull the mapping before you actually make modifications. The customer might regret the changes. Saving the original mapped information will allow us to restore the original mapping. That'll be very, very handy. So you could also see your before and after. This will also allow you to modify it and then upload it back as the customer's desired changes. A different second line is assign XP address 1. So what this does is actually uploads a new mapped table. After you pull it, you modify it, you save it, and then you upload it. The command XP assign the address. This is the file that'll be uploaded. So once again, once you pull the points, you modify it and you upload it. These are the most common commands used in Xpoint. Here's an example. The Xpoint system shipped pre-programmed. Here's our system. 90% of the programming is correct, but due to physical obstructions, further mapping modifications are needed. So here's the original system. We can see at the top, this is what was specified to us. The zoning. Relays 1, 2, relays 1, 2, relays 3, 4, relay 3, 4. And at the bottom, here's what actually happened. There was construction here. This room was split. This whole area was split. It's different. We have to make it match. The system went out pre-programmed already. This is all one zone. So here we have to split this up. Firstly, go through the FACs. Terminate the buses. Check bus stability and the presence of all the devices. And then we can focus on the Xpoint mapping. So here's our system, 2400 and the Xpoint. Step 1. Start by reading the Xpoint version of the router. Here at the bottom, we see that it's separate. Motorola is the top portion for the 2400 bus. The Amtel chip, the bottom, is for the Xpoint bus. If we can read the version of the Xpoint router, it means that the Xpoint router as a whole functions well. If we can't read the version of the Xpoint router, then it means that this portion does not work. Even if the Motorola, the 2400 portion works, but the Amtel or the Xpoint portion does not, then we can't map successfully. Step 2. Downloading the CSV file from the router. Once mapping file is downloaded, open it as shown. So here we see our folder, and here's our output file, davidsoncollege.csv. You right-click the file, you go to Open With, and you click on Notepad. If you just double-click it, it'll open it as an Excel file, but that's not what we want. You want to right-click it, Open With, Notepad. We want to edit it in Notepad because it's a whole lot easier to work with. The important thing is that you're going to only modify what's being requested. So here we have an example. We have the data that's pulled. We have a string of numbers, and we're going to get into this a little later. We have a string of numbers. The only thing we need to actually focus on is the modifications that are given to us. You're going to need the FIDs. These can be gathered by the supporting documents from the new project or by the installer on site. When the information is attained, then we can figure out which relays need to be remapped to different zones to accommodate the newly built room. Here's the table format. This is for a single pole relay. It's a string of numbers. The 0x indicates a hexadecimal, so this is the full FID. The FID is pretty much the address. This next number tells us what relay it is. This one also tells us what relay or DIM it is. And this last bit, a hexadecimal as well, tells us whether it's a relay or a dimming relay. And this ending This ending is for the photocell and aux sensors. If it's for non-dimming, then it's going to be all zeros. So since it's a single pole relay, we only have a 1 here. And we can have a 2, but there's no actual second dimming. And it's non-dimming, so we have zeros there. This one's cut and dry. For a dual pole relay, as before, we have the string of numbers. The first 0x indicates that it's a hex, all 8 numbers. It's a relay, so 0, 1 to zone 1 or to relay 1. It has a second relay, we assign it to zone 2, and it's non-dimming, so we leave it as zeros. Once again, all zeros for non-dimming at this bottom portion. Now here, this is for a micro panel. It's for a DH panel. We once again have the string of numbers, these are the FIDs. Here, 49, we're going to leave it as relay 49, and 50, even though it's not a dual pole relay, it can be. At this bottom portion, it calls out a photocell and a scene. This dimming portion, this is another micro panel. It's an iDim panel. It's a little different. It's a little more difficult. String of numbers once more. The FID. The relay 49. Now this calls on a dim channel. So relay 49, dim channel 1. And the 81, because it's a dimming relay. Here at the bottom, we now have a 0-1 here and a 0-1 here. So it's calling to a photocell, and it's also calling to an aux sensor. And the 1 is for the line. In this case, it's our first line. We'll go into it. We'll go into this a little deeper later. There's also a cheat sheet that we'll be looking at. So let's continue. Now here are 2 examples of the lists. The list will have all the relays in the same format, and the sequence and format must be used consistently, or else it won't map it. Now we have now this is the Xpoint assignment cheat sheet. Here we notice that there is card extensions. This is card 1, card 2, 3, and 4. And these are the photocells for card 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also the scenes for card 1, 2, 3, and 4. So based on all these numbers, you're going to come up with your table format. What you downloaded from your router. You pulled this. You pulled 4 lines of programming plus the bottom portion. So here are 4 lines and here's the bottom. Now here's what we have to modify. Here's the zone we have to split up. So we isolated it. The customer tells us that these 2 relays need to be, one of these 2 relays needs to be rezoned because of that newly built wall. So here's our modified CSV file. We leave everything else as is, except the bottom portion. This is the only thing we modify. We notice here at the top portion that it was 3434, but we now changed it to 3456. 56 is our newly built zone. This is our newly built room. All zeros here because it's non-dimming. Let's proceed. This is the outcome. This is the before and after. Here was 3434, but now we have 3456. So this whole area now is controlled differently because of that newly built wall. Verification. Once it's uploaded, you can verify by toggling the zones that were split. As you alternate the states of the relays, you have the installer verify that only that room is being controlled. So now you can program the zones/relays at the DTC Unity 2.0 or remote clock. Congratulations, you have successfully completed the Xpoint startup. So here's a full system. It consists of the backbone bus, which has the server card and the uplink cards. As you know, the uplink cards get connected to the 2400 system. Here's the Xpoint system, another 2400 bus, and you notice that it's connected to their workstations as well. Let's begin at the top. The workstation or internet goes to a hub, goes to a server card. The server card has the backbone bus, which is either bus 1 and bus 2. Let's look at bus 2. It's only a 2400 bus. Now bus 1, we have a 2400 bus, all this top portion, but it also has an Xpoint, 2 Xpoint buses. Guidelines and frequently asked questions. Differences in newer and older Xpoint relays. Here's a new relay, here's an old relay. Troubleshooting. Can't pull the table. Try to read the version of the Xpoint driver. If you can't read it, you might have a bad router. Isolate it and try again. If you isolate and you read the version, this means that it's a bad connection or the bus is unstable. If you isolate and you still can't connect, it means it's a bad router. Can't connect to the phone line? Or you keep losing the connection? Slow down your modem. It helps a lot. A maximum of 4 boards, 1 router, and 3 driver boards. You can't mix IDIM and IDH driver boards. If it's an IDIM router, then all the drivers have to be IDIMs. If it's an IDH router, then all the drivers have to be IDH cards. Even if it's a 2400 router, you can't put in IDIM or IDH. So depending on the router, the drivers have to be of the same firmware. The exports have a possible string of 128 modules per port. 128, that can be dimming, non-dimming, or dual pole. The maximum length is 2,000 feet per port, so about 4,000 feet for both ports. What we learned Xpoint as a whole. We learned the physical installation. We completed a full startup. We also went through the hardware. We mapped, went through an example, and the frequently asked questions. Thank you for watching.